Hello and welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. Today is January 22nd, 2020, and Happy New Year. Today's topic: will 2020 bring a crypto institutional bull run? Now, this is something we've talked about for a few years now on this channel, going way back to 2017 when we saw that Fidelity Investments had integrated its dashboard, its investing dashboard. We were allowed to bring in your Coinbase account. Now, a lot has happened since 2017, but one thing is for sure, that institutions have seen that there is a lot of money to be made in storing crypto, in trading crypto, and offering crypto products. Now, there's also the counter side to all of this, in that many of the regulators are in favor of crypto and many of the regulators are against crypto. And we're going to see how there's certain political maneuvers that are going on that may impact 2020 that may be very positive for the crypto industry. But first, let's take a look at a very broad picture of where the price of Bitcoin has been the last 5 or 6 years. People like to cherry pick data and they talk about how far off the high Bitcoin is or how far off the low it is. But let's take a look at the price of Bitcoin from its low of each year. I think it's a very interesting way of looking at it. So here's a chart someone's put together. A lot of people put together this chart here. But the low in 2014 was $200. The low in 2015 was $185. The low in 2016 was $365. The low in 2017 was $780. The low in 2018 was $3,200. And last year the low was $3,360. Now, that chart doesn't really tell you much in the sense that where the highs were, but it does show that there are higher lows as you move up the ladder each year, meaning that Bitcoin is basing to be, looks like, at least a $3,400 asset, because that's been, for over a year and a half, the lowest price that Bitcoin has been at. Now, it was inconceivable for a lot of people just a couple of years ago that Bitcoin would even attain a price equivalent to the price of an ounce of gold. And that's happened a long time ago. But look at 2017. The low that year was $780 and the high that year was about $20,000. Let's take another quick look at the pricing of Bitcoin in January of each year. 2014, they opened the year at 771, 2015, 314, 2016, 434, 2017 opened year at 998, 2018, following the big year in 2017, where the price rose to $20,000, it had already fallen to $13,000 in 2018 in January 1st. 2019 opened at 3,800 and we've closed it 7,200, and obviously 2020 we're opening at 7,200. Someone also pointed out that in January Bitcoin historically falls. Let's take a look here at the price of Bitcoin January 1st to the 31st. In 2014 the price actually rose from 771 on the 1st to the 31st to 831, but look at each year since 2015. Price opens at $314 on January 1 in 2015 and falls to $217. 2016, it starts the year at $434, ends the month at $368. Same with 2017, started the year at $998, fell to $970. 2018 started at $13,657 and closed the month at $10,221. And last year started the month at the year at $3,843 and ended at $3,457, and this year we're starting at 2020. Now, we do have the halving coming up, but that's not for a few months, so we'll see where all that heads. But let's talk now about enterprise and why this year might be the big year for the enterprise. After a lot of fits and starts, the backed, physically settled Bitcoin futures exchange is finally up and running. And you can see it hasn't been a massive success in terms of volume, but the volume is and has been increasing since launch. I think the first month it was pretty abysmal, just a few hundred contracts being traded. But now they're trading hundreds and thousands of contracts on a daily basis, and the amounts are in the hundreds of millions of dollars It's still small, but it is growing. And remember what Bakkt is, though. It's not just some rinky-dink operation. Bakkt is backed by the Intercontinental Exchange, which is the owner of the New York Stock Exchange, and it has partners with Microsoft and Starbucks. And later this year, they're expected to launch something that will allow Bakkt participants to take their physically delivered Bitcoin and use it to make purchases, they believe, at Starbucks. Now, I believe that's going to be through an intermediary. It's not going to be Starbucks accepting directly the Bitcoin. And no enterprise or no company is going to accept Bitcoin directly with the price volatility we've seen. The acceptance of Bitcoin take off through the use of payment processors, where they buy the Bitcoin, send the fiat value to the enterprise, and then on-sell the Bitcoin. And there's big money to be made in that type of process. Now, besides Bakkt, we also have Fidelity. Now, Fidelity, as I mentioned at the outset here, they had their eyes on working with an integration with Coinbase, and they now have their own division called Fidelity Digital Assets, and they buy and sell and store crypto assets for U.S. and now European clients. And one of the things about the institutions getting involved in crypto, they don't really have to get involved in a very big way. They really only have to allocate 0.5% of their portfolios to something like a Bitcoin position, because many people have pointed this out, that when you properly allocate a speculative asset to your portfolio, if you put it in a small amount, then if it goes to zero, your portfolio is not really harmed. But if that speculative asset turns into 5 to 10% gain, you could actually add some basis points to your overall gain with very little risk. And I think that's what people are looking at. And because the amount of Bitcoin is so limited, and there's only 21 million coins, and you're going to hear a lot of talk about this. A few million of them have been lost, and there's only 4 million left to mine. And with the halving coming up, even fewer Bitcoin are going to be coming on to the market in the coming years. That makes it a scarce asset, and if you only get a small amount of institutions involved and they're only buying small amounts, that can have a significant impact on the overall price of Bitcoin. So it's not just New York Stock Exchange with Bakkt, it's also Fidelity, and then it's also TD Ameritrade, which I believe was just also bought out by another company. I think it was Charles Schwab. But anyway, TD Ameritrade is backing a company called ErisX, and they are now going to start to launch a physically settled U.S. Bitcoin futures exchange along the lines of seems like we're getting an intermittent stream here. So again, I was saying that we have ErisX backed by TD Ameritrade doing Bitcoin futures, physically settled Bitcoin futures. We have backed by New York Stock Exchange and Microsoft doing futures. And then we have Fidelity also offering crypto custody and trading solutions for institutional clients in the United States and in Europe. Now that leads us to regulatory issues. Now there's a lot of people out there saying that they're going to shut Bitcoin down. Bitcoin is for illegal use only. Treasury Secretary McHenry has said something very similar to that. Donald Trump has come out and said he's not a big fan of Bitcoin. The Federal Reserve, one of the Federal Reserve governors, Brainerd, says that 50% of Bitcoin transactions are associated with illegal activity. Now, most of this, I think, is not true, and I think it's just, I don't know why they said, I don't think they've looked into it very much, because I think when McHenry was asked, well, what about cash? He said, well, we don't have a problem with cash, and obviously that's ludicrous on its face, because money laundering happens with cash all the time, and we've seen a lot of the money center banks actually pay huge fines. And maybe he's saying that we have a handle on it in the sense that we catch the banks all the time doing money laundering, but nothing is better for money laundering or illegal activity than pallets of cash, because cash does not leave a permanent trace like Bitcoin does. You can do chain analysis to track down some Bitcoin transactions, and it would just, cash is king when it comes to a lot of things, and that includes money laundering and illegal transactions. That's not to say you can't use Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies for illegal transactions or money laundering, but Bitcoin is not really ideal for that. There's privacy coins that might be better for that. But there is, the point I'm making is that there are people out there in regulatory positions of power, that are not in favor of Bitcoin, but they have not proposed anything to the point of banning in any sense. But we do have, remember, we have now legally regulated exchanges that deal in Bitcoin. After all, you have the CME group, which is regulated by the CFTC. You have the SEC has a page up on how to do legally registered ICOs. So there's not this broad sense that Bitcoin needs to be banned by the regulators. In fact, what they're trying to do is bring it under the regulatory umbrella, as most countries are. It seems the only countries that are trying to do outright bans are more of the third world type countries. But of course, that could change. The United States could see Bitcoin as a threat, or cryptocurrencies in general as a threat. But my sense is that what they're trying to do is bring as much of the crypto ecosystem under their purview through payment processing, through regulated exchanges, through regulated custody agreements and warehouses, so that they can spend time just tracking down the bad actors. Because if you think of it this way, take yourself out of the crypto space, take yourself off of crypto Twitter and people talking about everyone becoming their own bank and avoiding regulations and having privacy. Most people trade assets with no regard to any of those issues. When they buy an Apple stock on Fidelity, they're not concerned that somehow they're going to have to report that. They're not concerned that somebody might find out that they own Apple shares, and they trade them without any sense whatsoever, any concern for privacy. And I think that's going to be the same case for most, if not most of the dollars at least, that would flow institutionally into crypto. Fund managers, because they have to report their holdings, are not going to be concerned that they're trading. They're not going to buy a treasure. They can't. First of all, they have to settle their trades through all types of regulated entities. So that's why Fidelity, TD Ameritrade, RSX, Backed, and so on provide these types of platforms where they're not concerned whatsoever, because buying and selling Bitcoin to them will be no different than buying and selling Apple shares, Netflix shares, and so on. Besides those that are against crypto in positions of power, we are now seeing, however, and this makes sense because as the crypto ecosystem grows, you're going to have a lot of money involved with it. And when you have money players, they buy influence. Well, here's a very, very, very interesting development. The CEO of Backed, Kelly Loeffler, has been appointed as a Georgia senator. I don't mean to the state Senate of Georgia, but to the Senate of the United States of America. Now, that's a very odd appointment because they were thinking that, I think his name is Collins, is a congressman, very popular Republican congressman that pretty much should have been in line for that position to have been appointed to him, and they appointed Kelly Loeffler. Now, this is a temporary appointment, but she will take her seat, I believe, sometime this week. Now, again, she is was the head of Backed, which is backed by the New York Stock Exchange and Microsoft. So this isn't, I think, is very significant because you have a proponent, someone who's not just a proponent in theory of cryptocurrencies, but someone who actually was running the Backed Bitcoin Futures Exchange. Now, it goes further than that. There are other people in the Congress that are fans of cryptocurrency, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I am going to mention this one in particular because it has an impact on the 2020 elections. His name is Patrick McHenry. He is the ranking member of the House Financial Services Committee. He is a huge Bitcoin proponent. He sat in on the testimony when they had a lot of the Bitcoin people come last summer. He was using the term S-coin. He seems to be very interested in cryptocurrency. He says you can't stop cryptocurrencies. Governments can't try to stop cryptocurrencies. You say, okay, well, this is just a congressman. He's got his point of view. There's 435 of them. You're bound to have one or two here or there, and there are a few. But he is the ranking member of the House Financial Services Committee. Well, what's the big deal about that? Well, in 2020, if the Republicans retake the House, he will become the head of the House Financial Services Committee, in most likely, because that's what would happen. If the Congress shifts to the Republicans, then they get the chair. Well, having this guy who is a very big proponent of Bitcoin, you might get certain regulation that is missing. One of the biggest pieces of legislation that's holding back retail crypto is some type of better guidance on the tax treatment, but it's not just that, it's the tax treatment of transactions. Currently, every time you make a purchase with a cryptocurrency, you're technically, and from a tax perspective, making a sale. Well, that means that if you're going to buy and you're going to accumulate crypto, for example, on Bakkt, and then you want to spend it at Starbucks, well, all those sales are going to have to be characterized as either gains or losses on the sale, which makes for very unwieldy accounting for the individual and even an institution. It requires some advanced software to track all of that. But it also makes people less inclined to sell and more inclined to hold, and then you don't get the velocity of the transactions coming through via Bitcoin. Now, I think that's something that McHenry is in favor of. They have, in many instances, these de minimis requirements. So if you buy and sell, say, $500 worth of foreign currency, most people don't even pay attention to this, but if you go over, if you use foreign currency, there's a gain and a loss technically, because the Canadian dollar doesn't trade one-to-one to the US dollar, nor if you had yen or yuan or any other foreign, or the euro. When you spend them, you're technically selling your foreign currency at a gain or a loss, but the government looks the other way on that for small amounts, because your purpose in using that currency to make a transaction isn't an investment that needs to be taxed. But Bitcoin currently is viewed as a commodity, and therefore it is taxed on a gain or a loss on each transaction. But very interesting that if the GOP were to win in 2020, which is a possibility if Trump wins re-election in 2020, then a very strong Bitcoin proponent, Patrick McHenry, who's now the ranking member of the House Financial Services Committee, would become the chair in most likely. And finally, there's some other things going on in other cryptocurrencies. Litecoin has already had its halving. Now, the interesting thing about the halving is currently going into the halving for Bitcoin, the price is not rising, but the hash rate is now at an all-time high. We saw when Litecoin did its halving last year that its hash rate also rocketed to an all-time high, and then the price followed and went all the way up to $145. After the halving, because it gets more expensive to mine, because you only get half the reward, you only get half the number of Litecoin or half the number of Bitcoin, as the case may be, a lot of the miners shut their machines down. And we've seen that with Litecoin, and now the Litecoin hash rate is back to where it was pre-halving, and the price is back down to $45. And if the same could happen to Bitcoin, we don't know. Generally, or not generally, but there's a thought that going into the halving, the hash rate rises, and then the price rises, and it makes up for, when the halving happens, it makes up, the higher price makes up for the lower reward, and it all evens itself out. And also, Litecoin is engaged in putting together some type of privacy with Mimblewimble, and they're hoping to have that out later this year. There's some price predictions out on Ethereum and other cryptocurrencies. But I think the big thing this year is going to be what's going to happen with the enterprises. Are they going to come into the fold? Not in a big way. You don't need to. You're not going to see crypto. You're going to see crypto funds, but you're not going to see major funds allocate large percentages of their portfolio to crypto. But they don't have to do that to have a major impact. And I did see that there is, I think it's the Bitcoin fund by Grayscale. It actually has a large following amongst millennials. They tend to buy that. It's in the top 10 of assets that they buy. And of course, you have Apple and other popular shares, but the Grayscale Bitcoin Investment Trust has already gotten some decent traction and has a large amount of Bitcoin. Also, the Square app sells about $140 to $150 million worth of Bitcoin each quarter. And if you take the amount of Bitcoin that goes into or that Square buys, or that people buy from Square, and the amount of Bitcoin required to fund the Grayscale Bitcoin Fund, after the halving, that'll be about half of the newly mined Bitcoin to each quarter. So that also will add to the scarcity. Now, of course, none of this is investment advice. I'm just pointing out that if institutions get into cryptocurrencies in a minor way and in minor amounts with the limited amount of Bitcoin, that could have a very positive impact on the price. So let's see what you guys are saying over in the comments section. We don't have many comments. Well, I guess it is a bit early in the morning. Harvey Green says spot prices on the uptick this morning. I think he means spot prices on gold and silver. And Ann says gold is rocking. I haven't looked at the prices yet. Let's take a look here. Yeah, gold and silver up about 1% each. Platinum's the big winner today. Platinum's at 986, threatening to hit the 1,000 mark, and palladium's also up. I think the Bitcoin and Litecoin markets are slightly down. Yeah, Litecoin's at $41. It's down about 1%, and the same with Bitcoin is down to about $7,120. Matthew Rhodes says the government's promoting cryptos but not gold and silver. Interesting, I guess crypto is the new fiat. Well, we didn't talk about Matthew, but China is coming out with a cryptocurrency, and the real threat is not Bitcoin. It's governments doing. It's eliminating the whole entire banking system the way we know it. So, for example, if you want to buy U.S. Treasuries, the Treasury doesn't sell them to you or to anybody. They sell them to the authorized banks, Goldman Sachs and so on, and then they sell them to whomever. So there's an intermediary system. You've got the SWIFT system, where cryptocurrencies, even centrally issued cryptocurrencies by governments could do. That's the way of bypassing the dollar. This has nothing to do with the U.S. debt situation or being against the dollar because it has too much debt. That's a separate issue. What blockchain cryptocurrencies allow governments to do is just to create their own digital asset and just to send it across the world. And that's the real threat to the dollar, not the dollar's debt, because all of the countries have massive debt. All the countries are doing QE. All of the countries' central banks have rates down to 0 or below. That's not what's going to hurt the dollar. Is on a relative basis, the dollar is stronger than all the other currencies. The issue is whether a cryptocurrency, centrally issued cryptocurrency, can dethrone the dollar in terms of a payment system. That's an entirely different discussion for an entirely different day. But I want to thank everyone for joining me this morning. If you enjoyed today's presentation or any of the other presentations, you can support Smaulgld by sending items of value, checks, cash, or some people even send me small amounts of silver. It's very nice. The Smaulgld LLC, P.O. Box 714, Dover, New Hampshire 03820. Or you can hold up your phone to the QR codes and send Bitcoin or Litecoin. Or you can become a Smaulgld patron or PayPal donator, or you can even do it via Subscribestar. And of course, you can always go to the Smaulgld store and stack real wealth and get yourself one of those nice looking Smaulgld mugs. All of the links are on smaulgld.com on how to donate, and also below this BitChute and YouTube. So thank you very much for joining me. And maybe we'll get Bernie back, because the one thing about these cryptocurrencies is the 1% got all of them, and I don't think that the... Okay, Bernie, you're not being paid today, so we're kicking you off.